Great to see you again and welcome back, everyone. I'm Vladislav Novikov, and today I'm joined by Andriy Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrei, really glad to have you with us again.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start. Trump is giving Putin 12 days. That's new and totally unexpected, but is it too early to celebrate?
Very much so, because for the most part, we had President Trump arriving for his meeting with the UK Prime Minister this morning, and just outside the door, he announced, in response to a question, that he would be shortening the 50-day period to something shorter. And then inside the building, once they sat down, and President Trump, I believe, had over an hour where he spoke to the press, in one of the questions, in response, he mentioned that he would be shortening the 50-day period to some point between 10 and 12 days starting today. So we have a specific date that he's looking at, meaning no later than the second week of August, and we do not have any more input or details from there. So we'd have nothing
Yeah.
from the State Department, nothing from the National Security Council. This is all something that's going to be very much discussed this week as reporters try to get more details about this, or even in today's press briefing at the State Department, trying to get some kind of announcement about what this means.
Yeah, but when I look at that picture where Trump is talking about all this thing, I think he maybe some sad because they talk like uh, Putin is bad. Yeah, and maybe it's final. It's finished. 12 days, no more. Oh, like this. But my question is, if Trump already knows what he wants, why wait 2 more weeks? Is this Putin's final warning?
Very much seems so. A lot of what we heard today were repetitions of anecdotes that he had before, including the one that he repeated at the NATO press conference, where he said that, oh, the last time I spoke to President Putin, he said that he called me and said, how can I help with what's happening in Iran? And President Trump responded, I don't want you to, help with what's happening in Ukraine, not in Iran. And so you repeated that again today. There was a lot of repetition about the past phone calls and how many other conflicts Trump was successful. He mentioned how he was successful with negotiating a ceasefire with Cambodia and Thailand, which we'll see if that holds. He mentioned that Rwanda and Congo peace agreement, which is in the treaty at this point, but hopefully that stays longer. So President Trump mentioned that he has been using tariffs and trade as a method of being successful in stopping wars. He again mentioned the thousands of people he says that die every day in Ukraine and Russia, and I believe the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said that it was higher than what President Trump was saying, even because we know that the UK estimates are higher than other intelligence outfits. So we'll see what happens of this, but it
Yeah.
seems that he made this announcement. He relied on a lot of his previous anecdotes, but there weren't any details. So even in what you're saying that he was sad, that has been again a repeat of what he's been saying since his first phone call in late February with President Putin, and constantly repeating the fact that he couldn't get to the deal. He tried to make a deal. He's not being able to make a deal, and so he mentioned secondary sanctions today.
Yeah, but Andrei, I think in this topic we have one big problem. I talk about China
Yes.
because
Mhm.
if there is no peace in 12 days, will Trump hit China, Brazil, and India with tariffs? Some rappers say the US and China are close to a deal, and their trade war might end soon. That doesn't really add up, doesn't it?
Yeah, we have a lot of things happening as far as tariffs. Obviously, we've had a lot of deals announced in the last week. Deals the United States made with Japan and the EU today was announced. A lot of these things we don't have the details though, because a lot of these deals require the parliaments of those countries to vote on them. And I don't think a lot of the deals, as we've been explained to them, to us, we can't imagine that the parliaments are going to agree to this. So as far as what's happening with China, however, we have seen the numbers of tariffs go up and down radically. One of the things that's being discussed on American business news shows is the fact that we had a minimum tariff for goods that are $800 and less, called a de minimis tariff, that had been exempted for many years of these kind of goods. So cheap Chinese products to the United States and elsewhere, but especially to the United States, our tariffs didn't apply to any of them. And as of the Big Beautiful Bill and an executive order from April, but now added to in the Big Beautiful Bill, and now all those cheap goods are being tariffed. And we'll see exactly what's going to happen as far as the negotiations. Does China want its cheap goods coming to the United States? Is it interested in higher yield, higher costing goods? What exactly is China going to protect in these tariffs? And as part of the negotiation, as you mentioned, there are international negotiations as well. Part of the deal with the EU that was announced today was the fact that the EU would be buying fossil fuels from the United States, be that oil or natural gas. That is something that's not so much a business deal with the United States. That's also a national security consideration, given the fact that there are countries in the EU that are still determined on buying fossil fuels from Russia. So similarly, in the negotiations with tariffs with China, it's also going to be a negotiation of what they can do to help the United States and what its eventual goals are. And we've seen not only proposals from Erdogan in terms of hosting a peace summit, but we've also heard that President Trump can go visit China and meet with Putin in China. So I think both of these things are still options on the table, and we won't know until we get closer to September and October, when many more tariffs that were announced by President Trump are supposed to come into effect. Because on August 1st, we were supposed to have higher tariffs on China, but that seems to be delayed again, as far as the United States is saying.
Mm-hmm. Would it make sense to pressure only Russia and not China? What's your take?
Well, there's two sides to this, right? We know how much China is supplying Russia right now. So whether it's the chips in their rocketry,
but China says we don't do this.
Yeah.
We don't do this.
Right. I think President Zelensky's right. If China were to back out of this war, Russia would have to give up. It's clearly, but also it was very noticeable a couple of weeks ago when the Chinese foreign minister says that their goal is not a Russian victory, but they're not interested in Russia losing. So, so it seems like China has a different plan. And in fact, one of the conversations I was having with somebody in Washington the other week was how does this all impact Taiwan? And is it more likely or not that Russia is interested in prolonging the conflict in Ukraine, meaning prolonging Russia's attack on Ukraine? That's what we should call it. And at the same time, plan for that right now, as it looks like the United States and Europe haven't increased their defense production, they are sending a lot of material to Ukraine. Would not it be better for China to strike Taiwan in the next 2 years, as opposed to when Europe and the United States use that 5% GDP and finally get to that point and are actually producing things? So China might have different goals here, as opposed to what Russia is doing in Ukraine, and China may be using the war to expend the ability for the United States and other countries to help Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I want to ask about Europe. Just look at this. Trump just eat Europe. That's the tone of headlines in Bloomberg right now.
Yeah.
A humiliating deal that's put the EU in a submissive position. Was this really a case of the stronger side focusing the weaker one to agree, just to avoid something worse?
Well, that's being said because, of course, President Trump announced the deal with the UK, the United Kingdom, more than a month ago, where their minimum tariffs were 10%. Here, with the EU, there's a minimum tariff of 15%, and so many people who support President Trump are saying that he clearly the EU made a mistake and they should have accepted earlier. But again, we have no knowledge of what these actual deals are. And one of the most puzzling things, there were two deals announced in the last week. This EU is being the second, the first one being Japan last week, and there are significant investments listed in both of those deals. As far as the press release, because again, we don't know the details, but there are
Mm-hmm.
press releases that there will be investments by both the EU and Japan into the United States. And we have no idea what this means because it is being signaled to us that it does not mean investment in companies and building factories in the United States. It may mean an investment into a sovereign wealth fund that President Trump is starting, and especially as far as the Japan deal, there has been specific language in the press release that President Trump will have full control over where these funds are being spent. So even whether you're talking about Japan or the UK or the EU, we just don't know anything concrete because these deals are supposed to take 2.5 years to work out. Them being rushed, and we are getting the announcement of a framework decision. These deals might not come into force for another year or a year and a half, given the fact that a lot of these specific points need to be negotiated further on the sentence by sentence on the this kind of machine part versus that kind of machine part being tariffed. So we might not know for a long time exactly what's in these deals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but Ursula von der Leyen call it the best possible option, but best for whom?
Yes.
Washington or Brussels? Does this deal show how deeply the EU depends on the US for defense, energy, and even political direction?
I think mostly it demonstrates how much this administration in the United States is stymieing trade. So we are putting tariffs across various countries. We have stopped a lot of shipments coming in from Japan after that Liberation Day, where the stock market cratered and then
Yeah.
rebounded now to its highest point. But a lot of these decisions being made by the White House have severely interrupted international trade. And I think what Europe wants more than anything, being one of the wealthiest conglomerates of countries in the world, is making sure trade happens because increasing trade increases wealth. Tariffs decrease trade and decrease wealth. So even with the 15%, that is better than the 30% that was on the table from the United States. So I don't see this much of a capitulation. And again, a lot of this will depend on what the actual details are. There are many things that are being talked about that are being excluded. There are questions about European wines, European auto manufacturers. What exactly is being tariffed and what is not? We don't know exactly yet. And so I think once we finally have the details, then we can tell who was the winner, who wasn't.
Okay, about weapon. Now it look like this. Trump made EU countries increase defense spending, and now made them buy EU's weapons.
Hmm.
Is this really what happening? Honestly, it looks like a kind of genius.
It is once we actually see what happens. I think still at this point, the best way of getting weapons to Ukraine is for individual countries to send what they have already in their armed forces supply now, and then work on getting that reimbursed or refilled later on with purchasing new weapons from the United States. I don't think a lot of countries in Europe, particularly France, I know Italy also aired some reservations about spending money on American weapons, given the fact that they both have very sizable arms manufacturing capabilities of their own that they want to invest and have jobs in their country, not in the United States. So I think a lot of these details, again, something that was announced by President Trump with Mark Rutte, we did not get the full details. It does not seem that all the nations were together on this. This was simply a conversation from Rutte with having buy-in with a lot of countries. But in the end, a lot of the details still have to be worked out. So in the meantime, what we're going to see is countries sending weapons that they already have and then purchasing either from their own domestic suppliers or the United States the replacement.
Mhm. In media, we talk about one more risk, and I mean, at the same times, there's fear that the US might pull its troop from Europe, which could provoke Putin. How do you see that risk?
Oh, well, this is something that's been proposed by the United States in the first administration of Trump, but especially before even the inauguration. We know that's something that Pete Hegseth has been talking about for years. We don't know if he's going to stay on as Secretary of Defense, but it is interesting that we still have a Supreme Allied Commander that is from the United States. We just had Commander Grynkevich take over as Supreme Allied Commander. That is something also the United States talked about, possibly not having the United States be the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and have another country take over that. They've also talked about combining European command with African command. That would be over nearly 200 nations under one command, which is a little absurd. But if you're talking about reducing your the amount of military, then that makes sense. There's a dichotomy with President Trump where he says that he wants to show peace through strength and the best weapons and the best army, but at the same time he thinks that he can decrease the size of the army and decrease the amount of spending. So we don't know where that meets reality with his definition, but that's something that we have yet to see that in a lot of countries.
Okay.
We saw force reduction during President Trump's first term, but we haven't seen it yet this term. I know South Korea is thinking about that. Japan is thinking about that, as well as Europe.
Hmm. Okay, and one more important thing. What's your view on the situation around NABU and SAP, Ukraine's anti-corruption bodies? What do you know about the latest development there?
Well, we've heard that the new bill is being proposed in Verkhovna Rada. For me, being outside Ukraine, my concern is that it does for if you're outside Ukraine, it doesn't matter if you're President Zelensky and his office, or you're the people in the streets asking for something different, or you're the Verkhovna Rada. All of that is Ukraine. All of that
Yeah.
is Ukraine if you're outside. So for me, it was, where does Ukraine end up after this? And I think the activists, journalists, and activists, either Ukrainian or Western, who work in Ukraine or interested in Ukraine, we've done as good a job as possible explaining to other media what exactly happened in Ukraine and how different Ukraine is from Russia. So why was Russia passing laws at the same time banning the use of a VPN, and it would cost $1,000 if you would do that in Russia, while at the same time Ukraine passed a law in full openness. So the parliament passed something. It wasn't done in the best way, sure, but it was. We saw that there was a vote happen. We heard that the president signed it. We almost immediately had protests for the next 48 hours, and almost immediately a reaction from the presidency. There's no more democratic demonstration to the world that Ukraine is a democracy. It's not, as J.D. Vance said, a autocracy or a dictatorship. It's clear that Ukrainians have the right to protest. Ukrainians have the right to be involved in politics. And I think in the end, Ukraine ends up in a better place, because not only should we have a better law in the end, but also our image is increased as far as differentiating ourselves between the kind of laws and protests we have in Ukraine versus what happens in Russia.
Yeah, it's look like local political battle, but it's very risky
Yes.
for us. Yeah. So is Zelensky internal battle with anti-corruption institutional already hurting Ukraine position? The EU is speaking out, but Trump is staying silent.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think Trump really understands or cares about what's happening in terms of internal battle, unless he can use that for political reasons. But we've seen only his far right MAGA fanatics like Marjorie Taylor Greene make comments about this. Again, in the end, we can demonstrate that Ukraine isn't a dictatorship, and if there was an issue with this law, clearly it is being addressed democratically. As far as what other European leaders are saying, I didn't really hear anything that bad from the G7. I saw that they were determined to work with Ukrainian officials, include a dialogue. I think the biggest thing for Ukraine is to demonstrate that not only will President Zelensky's office have a meeting with all law enforcement bodies, which is what he did almost immediately after the bill was signed, but definitely have some kind of constructive dialogue with civil service groups, those kind of Hromadski organizations that are interested in anti-corruption reform. Also, I think one thing that would really changes perspective, again, if you're outside Ukraine, is this is a one of many law enforcement bodies in Ukraine, and there are very good arguments being proposed in Western press about why exactly is there yet another. Why are there so many law enforcement bodies, separate prosecutors, and wouldn't they be fighting against each other? Shouldn't Ukraine work towards a bill or a change to its constitution to actually figure out how many law enforcement bodies you need to have? And as well as one thing that reflects on American perspective is this is the closest that the NABU is and the SAPO would be an independent special prosecutor in the United States, which we don't have, but we assign them for specific cases. And traditionally, the American public has not been favorable about independent counsel investigations that go on for many years. Here, NABU and SAPO has been operating for over 10 years in this new way. So I think there's a lot that Ukraine can work towards understanding with the rest of the world. But at this point, I think overall Ukraine comes out on top.
Mm-hmm. But media on the West, and many people in Ukraine, when Trump wants to, he steps in. Many say his silence actually pushed Zelensky to act.
I don't believe that because I haven't seen him having demonstrating that much interest. I actually haven't heard much about the State Department or any international bodies coming in here. It's also interesting that this happened almost immediately after the change of government. So we have now different people accountable for this. Who was talking to Shmihal now as the defense secretary? Maybe there were some outside people trying to work with him because they knew him as the longest serving prime minister. Maybe Ms. Sverdenko's position as the deputy prime minister, maybe her role with signing the minerals deal allowed her to have more input from Americans that way. I don't think we really know who changed whose mind here, but in the end, for me, it's about whether it's Zelensky, the people in the street, the office of the president, or the Verkhovna Rada. All of that is Ukraine outside of Ukraine. And I need to make sure that the rest of the world understands that what Ukraine is doing, whether there are disagreements, it's all towards the same goal, which is a fight against corruption, and that there is only one enemy, and that's attacking Ukraine right now.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. So, Yuri, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and insight. Great to have you with us, and wait for our next conversation.
Thank you so much. I can't wait till next time.
Yeah.